Hey guys, we're looking at Isaiah 7 and 8 today. Getting a little bit of a late start trying to put this together, but one of the things that I kind of wanted to point out here is that we're looking at Ahaz, who is the king of the southern kingdom of Judah, and then up above him uh, you have Israel and Jerusalem and Syria. And basically the kings of the northern kingdom of Jerusalem and Syria are kind of coming together against Judah and kind of, going to overthrow Ahaz and replace him. One of the things that I really kind of wanted to focus on, we can get into a lot of the history, and a lot of these two passages are really dealing a lot with the history, but there's two pretty significant passages that are prophetic in nature, both having to do with the birth of Jesus Christ. Um, but one of the things that I really kind of wanted to point out here was in chapter 7, verse 6, it, they're saying, the kings of Assyria and Jerusalem are saying, "Let us go up against Judah and vex it, and let us make a breach therein for us, and set a king in the midst of it, even the son of Tabiel. Thus said the Lord God, it shall not stand, neither shall it come to pass." So one of the things that we're kind of seeing here is that both of these kingdoms are going to try and come against Israel, or come against Judah rather, and God is saying, yeah, that's not going to happen. However, I want you to kind of see Ahaz's reaction, and this is kind of what I really wanted to focus on in this passage. In verse 11, God is telling Ahaz, actually let's back up to verse 10, it says, "Moreover the Lord spoke again unto Ahaz, saying, Ask thee a sign of the Lord thy God, ask it either in the depth or in the height above." And one of the things that God is telling him here is, look, Ahaz, you need to stop this. One of the things we're going to see here in chapter 8 is that Ahaz is trying to put like a confederacy together with Assyria, not the same thing as Syria. And he's trying to put this together with them and using that as his crutch to kind of rely on instead of relying on God. And God is still reaching out to Ahaz and saying, look, I need you to trust in me. I need you to trust that I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. And he tells him, ask of me a sign. Ask either in the heavens above or in the depths beneath. Whatever it is you want, ask a sign of me and I'll show you. Because God is even trying to do everything. He's trying to bolster Ahaz's faith by saying, look, I'll even go so far as to show you a sign. And Ahaz's response in verse 12, it says, "But Ahaz said, I will not ask, neither will I tempt the Lord." And one of the things that we can kind of see here, and we see this a lot, in kind of the churchy community and stuff like that, is this this kind of false piety. It's this idea of self-righteousness, like, no, I would not do that, which it comes off, if you kind of frame it that way, it comes off as being, no, I'm being very pious and relying on God. But in reality, we can see in the next chapter, he's not relying on God. He's trying to form a confederacy, and God is telling him not to. He's telling him, look, I'm creating a situation here whereby you need to trust me, that I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. And he even goes so far as to say, I'll even go so far as to show you a sign. And we have a tendency to look at signs or throw out a fleece or things like this, and we look at these things as inherently bad things, but they're not. There's many times where signs were given. There's many times where a fleece, so to speak, was thrown out, in an effort to bolster that particular individual's faith. And one of the things that we see here is that God is offering this. This is not a case of unbelief where the individual is saying, I don't believe you, God, you're going to have to show me, you're going to have to prove it to me. This is a case of God saying, look, I know your faith is weak, but I want to strengthen it, and I want to show you a sign. And Ahaz and his false piety, which God can see his heart, God knows exactly what his real intentions are. He tells him, look, I'll show you a sign, and Ahaz is like, no, because I wouldn't tempt the Lord thy God. And that it's just really kind of self-righteous and stuff. And God tells him in verse 14, he was like, well, I don't really care, because I'm going to give you a sign anyway. And this is where he gives a prophetic passage, both a near and a far fulfillment. And he says, therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. And obviously we know that that word Emmanuel, that name Emmanuel, means God with us. And this is a prophecy of Jesus being born of a virgin. So we get to chapter 8, and this is where in verse 13 it says, sanctify the Lord of hosts himself, and let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. And he shall be for a sanctuary, but for a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel, and for a gin and for a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And this is coming right out of 1 Corinthians and 1 Peter, where it talks about Jesus being a rock of offense and a stone of stumbling that the Jews would ultimately stumble over. But one of the things that we see here is that in verse 13 he tells them, look, sanctify the Lord of hosts, himself. Let him be your fear. Let him be your dread. Don't fear, Jerusalem. Don't fear Syria. Don't try and solve this problem your own. I'm going to give you a sign. I'm trying to bolster your faith. I'm trying to work within your heart. Don't harden your heart, but just trust in me and see. And it's not man that you need to fear. It's God that you need to fear. It's me that you need to fear, is what he's telling them. And he goes on and so on and so forth. And the reason why he doesn't want them forming alliances and confederacies with other nations is because of that tendency to adopt their policies, their pagan rituals and things like that, to drift and to fall away. And we see that, as we get up in verse 16, he says, bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples, and I will wait upon the Lord that hideth his face from the house of Jacob, and I will look for him. And he goes on to talk about, he's telling them, you need to hold my law, hold my testimony, hold what I say, hold that sacred. What I say will happen, it will come to pass. And he goes on to tell them in verse 19, and when they shall say unto you, talking about, if a confederacy is built and so on and so forth, and when they shall say unto you, seek unto them that have familiar spirits and unto wizards that peep and mutter, and that should not a people speak unto their God for the living to the dead? And he's basically saying, look, you form these alliances and stuff, and they're going to start questioning you. Hey, look, we need to speak to familiar spirits. We need to speak to wizards and witchcraft and all this stuff. We need to speak to the dead on behalf of the living. And God is telling them in verse 20, to the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, talking about the law and the testimony, it is because there is no light in them. And he goes on to basically tell them kind of what's going to end up happening. They'll be driven into darkness and so on and so forth. And this is kind of, we can see a lot of similarities here in our own day-to-day walk, as we kind of form confederacies and we form relationships and stuff like that to kind of better our situation, because we don't really want to trust in the Lord. But there's many, many times where the scriptures tell us, look, put the Lord to the test. Trust in him, and he will take care of it. So I really kind of wanted to point this. I know we kind of bounced around a little bit in these two chapters here. Both chapters having prophetic references talking about Jesus, but also both having some practical application to put our trust in God and not to put our trust in man, and that the ultimate destination of putting our trust in man is to be driven into darkness, as we see in chapter 8 verse 22. So anyway, I want to share that with you guys today. So God bless.